Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for today, Community Choice Agencies and Energy Resilience, a presentation on the Redwood Coast Energy Authority's Airport Microgrid. Appreciate y'all being here, and I'm just going to make a few opening comments, and then we will get right into our webinar. First, just want to thank our sponsor, the Adobe Foundation, for this webinar and the previous 3 webinars in the series on community choice agencies and DERs, distributed energy resources. The logo's at the bottom there. The organization is the Center for Climate Protection, where I work, and the program is the Clean Power Exchange. Your webinar team today, myself, Woody Hastings, Energy Program Manager, and Nina Turner, Energy Program Associate, who will be helping out with the question and answer period at the end of the webinar. And the Adobe project team, Michael Clausen, Julie Allingham, and Barry Vesser. Julie Allingham today will be presenting on the Distributed Energy Resources Hub that we're going to be launching soon. And our presenters for today, featured presenters, Jim Zoellick, Managing Research Engineer at Schatz Energy Research Center in Humboldt State University, Nikki Avila, Grid Innovation Engineer at PG&E, and Richard Engel, Director of Power Resources at Redwood Coast Energy Authority. Our presenters' biographies are all available in the handout section in your control panel. There are 5 handouts. Couple housekeeping items here. The webinar is being recorded, so everyone will receive a copy of the recording. We are going to keep you all in listen-only mode for the duration of the entire webinar. You can enter your questions in your control panel at any time during the webinar, and the question and answer will be in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar. Again, regarding the handouts, there are 5, the presenter bios, which I already mentioned. We will include the slide decks in the handouts. And also there is an Airport Microgrid fact sheet in your handout section. So just a little overview of today's webinar. Again, we'll have a brief introduction on the DER Hub by Julie Allingham of the Adobe project team. And we will follow that with the main presentation on the Redwood Coast Airport Renewable Energy Microgrid, and then have the question and answer period at the end. We think we've got a really good webinar for you today, so sit back and enjoy. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Julie, and so give me just a moment here.
I don't need the mouse, Woody.
No, I'm just going to hand over the presenter to you.
Okay, yeah, and while you're doing that, I'll start with this slide. So,
Yes.
Go
ahead.
Good morning, everybody. This year, Michael Clausen and I worked with the CPX team to coordinate this 4-part DER webinar series and have been curating resources for a new DER-focused section of the Clean Power Exchange. We're calling it the DER Hub, and I'm just going to take a few minutes to preview it for you today. The overall goal of that hub is to provide a central location for finding CCA relevant information about DER, and also to include some content not easily found elsewhere. You'll find original content about DER technologies, as well as curated links to existing resources, webinars, presentations, and reports. And as a key part of that DER Hub, we've invested in building a new and evolving DER projects clearinghouse, which I'll say more about in the demo. Thanks to our early contributors and reviewers, we're on track to make the hub available in the coming weeks. We still have more work to do before then, including inviting your programs teams to help validate some of our research about your key DER efforts. But I'd like to just give you a glimpse of the hub now in a demo.
So now I'll change to for you to be the presenter, right?
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, hold on. And It should be your screen coming up.
Okay, great. I think I have it, Woody.
Yep.
Okay. So, you know, distributed energy resources, it's a rapidly evolving space. So to meet our goals, it's really going to be important that we have current but really focused information. So content will be added to this on a regular basis. But what we have as our initial scope is on this landing page, you'll see 6 main sections for our initial scope. The first 2 sections provide context for the other sections, really, of the DER Hub. This introductory resources section, for example, includes 3 types of resources that are really good foundational DER materials for CCAs to be aware of, including a summary view of DER relevant state policy. Let me go back here to the main page. Sections 4 and 5 down here, energy supply methods and demand side technologies. These are helpful descriptions of particular DERs and links to resources specific to that type of DER. So for example, this section is about energy supply and generation methods, and we have a section for each of these types of generation, and each one will be consistent and have an overview, relevance for CCAs, opportunities for action, and then some key resources and partners, potential partners. Same thing on the demand side technologies, just to give you a sense of what's there. We have electric vehicles, building electrification, these types of things that are non-generation but still considered DER. The approaches to DER planning section is it's going to document and link to selected examples of different ways CCAs have approached their DER planning and strategy efforts. But the main part I wanted to show you today, really to focus on it a little bit more, is this major component, which is called the DER Projects Clearinghouse. So here we're hosting a new central database of DER projects and programs. Think of this really kind of as a launching point to learn about other specific DER efforts that CCAs are implementing or piloting. Our goal really is to help you locate projects of interest, but also to include some harder to find information, like, let me scroll to the right a little bit here. You'll see after the basic description of a project, you'll see things about partners and results, lessons and notes about the project, who to contact to have more discussion, and some key project documentation links that might be helpful to CCAs who are thinking about pursuing something in this realm. It's an Excel sheet, so you can search and filter by any of the column headings. So you could look, for example, periodically for the most recently added entries or the things in the last month by using the date added field. Or you could look for just certain CCAs or just certain resource types if you're really interested in building electrification or integrated microgrids, for example. So you can look for anything that you want, kind of search and sort as you choose. You can also, in the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see that you can open this in full screen and you can download it to use as you like. As I mentioned, once Michael and I complete our research to draft entries for your CCA's key DER projects and programs, we're going to reach out to your programs team to get validation and really some of this supplemental information that's hard for us to know without your help, like lessons learned, measured results, links to project materials that other CCAs might find the most helpful. So also, I just want to mention that our team has developed a really there's a couple of spots on the hub here where there are links to capture your input. So we've got a really easy process defined to keep the project information standardized and regularly updated, and also to capture suggestions for the hub overall. So we need your participation to do that, but we'll make it as painless as possible for everybody to share your new projects with us. So that's the quick tour for today, and thank you for your attention on that. We will be doing a soft launch of announcing the soft launch really by the end of April, and you'll be able to then at that point peruse through this yourself. Please look for that announcement. And then really with that, let's just move on to the main event for today and learn about the Airport Microgrid project, starting with Richard Engel. During the Q&A, we'll cover your questions about the Microgrid project, but also if there are some about the DER Hub, we're happy to field those then as well. Thanks, Woody.
All right, thank you. So Julie, I think you're going to need to shift control of keyboard and mouse to Richard. So if you can do that in your control panel. Also just want to note to folks that I've heard that there is some kind of glitch with the handouts. So if you're having any trouble getting a hold of the handouts there, don't worry, we will provide them in the webinar section on the Clean Power Exchange website, and we can send a link to that, the materials to all of you. So are you able to go ahead, Julie, and hand over control of the keyboard and mouse to Richard?
I did try to do that. I don't know if Richard has it, but
it looks like I do.
Okay.
Good.
Great.
Okay.
Oh, now I just need to pull up your, sorry, there you go. Couple little steps here, folks. Richard, you should, is this ready?
I am not seeing the, I should be seeing the slideshow, right?
Oh, yeah, hold on just a second here. So,
Woody, did you take presenter back from me?
I did not because I couldn't. Can you maybe give it back to me? I'm not seeing my ability to control that.
Okay, let me see.
Not giving me myself as an option. There we go. There we go.
Okay.
All right, good job. So now, Richard, you should be able to see your screen there.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Woody.
Beautiful. All right.
All right. Well, thanks, Woody and Julie and the rest of the team at Center for Climate Protection and Clean Power Exchange for inviting our group to talk with you all today. Excited to have this opportunity. And I am trying to move on to the next slide now.
Click in anywhere in the slide first, and it should switch over to you.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, I think it when she switched it back to me, it came back to me completely. So now you should have it.
Okay, great. Looks like I do now. Thanks very much. Okay, so I'm going to give you background on Redwood Coast Energy Authority and our Community Choice Energy Program. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Airport Microgrid project, including the funding for it, our partners, and talk a little bit about the value that the project has for Redwood Coast Energy Authority as a CCA. So RCEA is a little bit different from most of the other CCAs in California in that we pre-existed as a joint powers agency. We were established in 2003. And our purview includes the county of Humboldt and the 7 incorporated cities in the county, as well as our local water district. From the beginning, we focused mostly on energy efficiency and demand-side management services for our member agencies. and have been in a long-time partnership with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, under the program called Redwood Coast Energy Watch, providing those DSM services. We've also diversified into clean transportation and now operate a network of public electric vehicle charging stations across the county. And we've been active in community energy and climate action planning. So fast forward to 2017, in May of that year, we became the 7th operating CCA in California. It's been very successful. We've got a 93% participation rate. Like most of the CCAs, we offer a couple of different customer participation options. The base program that people enroll in automatically is 40% renewable energy, and we have a 100% renewable option people can choose. We are toward the smaller end of the CCAs in size. We serve about 60,000 customer accounts, delivering about 700 gigawatt hours a year, with an annual peak load about 130 megawatts. Because of our cool coastal climate, we're actually a winter peaking service area, unlike many parts of California. Our board set an objective to maximize local renewables while keeping our rates competitive with PG&E, as most CCAs find it necessary to do for our business model to work. Our portfolio notably includes PPAs with local biomass plants that make up about 1/4 of our energy portfolio. And this has a lot of importance to the county in terms of providing a way of managing waste from the local forest products mills, as we're a big forest products producing county, and provides skilled blue-collar jobs in the area. And it was a resource that was already existing for us in the form of some plants that had been operating since the 1980s. The balance of our portfolio is short-term procurement from various resources across the western states. And in February of this year, we issued an RFP for long-term renewable contracts, and we have closed that RFP and are now evaluating the responses we've got from that with a goal of having contracts in place by this summer. Turning our attention now to the Airport Microgrid. This project is being developed at the California Redwood Coast Humboldt County Airport, kind of a lengthy name, but more succinctly known on boarding passes as ACV. So our Airport Microgrid project is partly funded by the California Energy Commission's EPIC program, and this Venn diagram you see on this slide was included in the proposal we put into the Energy Commission. And I think it captures nicely some of the key stakeholders and what their interests were in the project that brought it into being. Up at the top is the County of Humboldt's driver. They own and operate the airport facility. And like most local governments, they're having an increasing need for resiliency, a lot of that driven by climate change impacts, and critical facilities are where they're most concerned about that. And the airport includes a Coast Guard facility, which serves to further make it a real critical facility around here. PG&E, as the incumbent IOU here, has a driver for this in that, like other IOUs, they're working on transitioning to a sustainable smart grid for the future, and microgrids are seen as an important way to do that. Increasingly so just in the last couple of years with the wildfire risks associated with long-distance power transmission, and microgrids potentially being a partial solution to that risk. For us, RCEA, the driver is, like other CCAs, we're looking for generation resources and want to develop those locally to the extent that we can, and also looking for energy storage as a way of matching our renewable energy resources to our loads. What I call the secret sauce in all this was Schatz Energy Research Center. They're a longtime local partner of RCEA. They're based at Humboldt State University, just about 8 miles away from our offices in Eureka. And they have real-world expertise and experience with microgrids. They're a couple of years into operating a microgrid also here in Humboldt County at the Blue Lake Rancheria. That's an award-winning project. And they've also since then launched into a couple of additional microgrid projects. So they know how to do this stuff, and this project really wouldn't be possible without them as a skilled local resource. So the microgrid is located, as I mentioned, at the ACV Airport. It's going to serve 18 PG&E electric accounts, most of them being CCA participants. The distribution infrastructure there is owned and will continue to be owned and maintained by PG&E. The generation and storage assets are going to consist of 2 megawatts of solar and a 2 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour battery owned and operated by us, RCEA. There are also existing diesel generators at the airport operated by the county and the Coast Guard that will still provide the kind of last resort backup. The project cost is a total of about $11 million, with $5 million of that coming from the CEC's EPIC grant program, and the balance of it coming from RCEA. We're funding that through a loan from the USDA's Rural Utilities Service, and we'll pay back that loan over time with ratepayer dollars. There are also in-kind cost share contributions coming from other partners on the project. And those partners include the aforementioned Schatz Energy Research Center and RCEA, the county as the owner and operator of the airport, PG&E as an active partner in this, and we'll be hearing more from Nikki at PG&E in a few minutes about their role in this. We're also getting support from the Energy Authority, who acts as RCEA's scheduling coordinator, and on this project, they're going to be working with us on how to basically commodify the energy storage asset as something that can be delivered into CAISO. Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories is providing the brains of the system in terms of all the controls for the microgrid. TRC, a consulting firm, is supporting us with analysis related to cybersecurity needs and the development of the business model that will be replicable. Jim will talk a bit more about that replicability aspect for this project. Just mentioning again, partial funding coming from the California Energy Commission. And one other important participant in this not shown here is we've recently contracted with Tesla, who will provide the turnkey solar and energy storage assets for the project. So just in closing, the value proposition for RCEA and doing this project is, first of all, the EPIC grant helps us keep prices below market level on this, and it's a learning experience for us and our member agencies on building a local portfolio of utility scale renewables beyond the biomass plants that are of ancient vintage now, and really the only examples of that kind of resource locally so far. The energy storage mandate that's been a moving target, because we've just recently learned that there's been a clause triggered in this legislation that no longer makes this mandatory for the CCAs for the foreseeable future, but we're obviously still interested in the benefits of energy storage and also in fulfilling the state mandate for load-serving entities like CCAs to have a substantial portion of our RPS resources under long-term contracts within a couple of years. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Jim Zoellick from Schatz Energy Research Center to talk to you a little bit more about the technical aspects of this project.
Great, thank you, Richard. And I think Woody is going to bring up my presentation, transfer control to me. Thank you to Woody and the team from the Center for Climate Protection for hosting this webinar. And I was talking just before we started with Woody about as this project moves forward, we hope to do a few more webinars and keep people abreast of the progress and success of this project. So I'm going to start by giving you an idea of the Schatz Energy Research Center's role in this project. Richard did that a little bit, but so we were the prime applicant to the California Energy Commission for the grant that is partially funding this project. And so we are the prime contractor under the CEC grant. We are operating as the owner's engineer for the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. So they will be owning the generation assets. We're representing them in this project. We're the technical lead and really the project lead. And we're responsible for integration and coordination. So really working with our vendors and all of the subcontractors and making sure that everything comes together seamlessly and that we have a successful project. So let's see here if I can advance the slides. Let's see, maybe I have to click first. There we go. Okay, so launch into talking about the project. So the Redwood Coast Airport Renewable Energy Microgrid. You can see in the image on the left here, so this is sort of an artist rendition that's overlaid on top of Google Earth images, satellite images. The image to the left, you can see in the upper part of that image, the end of the southern runway for the airport. And in the upper left-hand corner is the parking area and the main terminal for the airport. And then just below that, you see the large ground-mounted PV array that we'll be putting in. The total array size is about 2.4 megawatts. That's a DC rating. It'll cover about 7 acres of the property. In the upper corner of the array, you can see on the image on the left, some small white dots, essentially. That is basically a close-up of that is in the image on the right. That's the energy storage system that'll be located next to the PV array. As Richard said, 2 megawatts and 8 megawatt hours of battery energy storage. The array that you see in the image on the left there, it looks like one large array, but it's actually 2 electrically distinct and isolated arrays. Up in the upper corner, it is a 330 kilowatt array that will be connected to PG&E's grid as a net metered generator, actually through aggregate net metering, and it will be serving load for the airport, the main airport account, the main terminal, and that will save the county about $50,000 per year. And that essentially is the lease payment that RCEA is paying the county. This property belongs to the county. RCEA, that's kind of their lease payment to the county for use of this property for the overall project. And then the rest of that array, the roughly 2.1 megawatts of DC, that will be interconnected to PG&E's grid as a wholesale generator under the wholesale distribution tariff, and that will be scheduled and the power from it sold into the CalISO wholesale market. That large 2.1 megawatt array will be DC coupled to the battery storage. And by that, I mean that it will be connected on the DC side of the batteries, on the DC bus, and that whole system, the batteries and the PV coupled together, will then have one set of AC inverters that are grid facing. And as Richard said, that's that turnkey system of PV and battery storage is being offered, or is being handled by Tesla. Oops, I got ahead of myself there. Okay, so the next slide here, this kind of gives you an idea of how the system works. I'll talk through this briefly. So this is a simplified single line diagram of electrical schematic of the microgrid system. There was one of the photos that Richard showed of the project was also a Google Earth satellite image, and actually had of the airport property, and actually had sort of superimposed over it the PG&E grid. I'm not sure if people noticed that, but that actually came from PG&E's PV RAM map. And that is, so we're on the end of PG&E's Janes Creek 1103 distribution circuit. And that's the very end of that circuit, or a spur on that circuit. And it serves, as Richard said, it's actually about 17 accounts, and then we're adding an EV charging account. So it'll be a total of 18 accounts. The existing accounts are shown there in orange on the diagram, and that includes the main airport service that I mentioned, and then the Coast Guard station that Richard mentioned, and a number of other accounts. So the green and the blue objects in the diagram are the assets that we'll be adding as part of the microgrid project, and that also includes the switches that you see there called recloser 1 and recloser 2. Recloser 1 is the islanding recloser, so we'll disconnect the microgrid from the main grid and put it in island mode, and recloser 2 is the generation recloser that can isolate the 2 megawatt battery and 2 megawatt PV array from the system. So the way this will work in blue sky operation, both of those reclosers will be closed. That'll be most of the time. The net metered array will be credited to the airport account. The 2 megawatt array and battery storage will be interconnected and offered up in the CalISO market. And everything will be running in parallel with the main grid, and both of those resources will be in grid following mode. If there is a disturbance on the main grid, so power goes down on the main grid, the controller will identify that, open recloser 1, and isolate the microgrid into island mode. At that point, the smaller array will go offline because it has anti-islanding features like any typical grid-connected array. The battery and PV array connected to the battery will then be brought online to form the grid and serve the loads. And actually, after 5 minutes, the smaller, this says 250, that's an AC rating. So the smaller array will come back online after 5 minutes. That's the normal protocol. And then that will continue to run. And really this, because of the size of the wholesale market array, that 2 megawatt array in battery storage, it's really oversized for the load in this microgrid. It's sized for wholesale market participation. And because of that, we have a long amount of capability to run in island mode without any other resources. In the worst case situation, if the battery got discharged, the backup generators that are on standard automatic transfer switches would come online for both the airport and the Coast Guard station. The one other thing I'll point out is that, well, I should say, when PG&E comes back online, the microgrid controller will sense that. It will synchronize the resources on the microgrid with the grid power, the frequency on the grid. When those are synced up, the recloser 1 will close, and there'll be a seamless transition back to being parallel with the grid. And the battery and PV system, the 2 megawatt system, will go back into grid following mode. It was in grid forming mode during the island situation. And then the PG&E distribution control center block there, that just shows that this microgrid will there will be insight to the microgrid and control capabilities from PG&E's distribution control center, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. So this slide gives you an idea of the schedule. So we became under contract with the CEC back in August of 2018. We're in the design, engineering, and permitting phase right now. We expect that to continue through the end of this year and into the early part of next year, at which point construction should start around the end of Q1 2020. We expect that to take about a year, so it should be done by the end of 2020. That'll put us into the commissioning phase. That should be done around the first quarter of 2021. And then we'll be in full operation for a couple of years where we're monitoring the system, collecting data, reporting back to the CEC. Our contract ends with the California Energy Commission in Q1 of 2023. But there is a long-term lease being negotiated now between the county and RCEA, a 25-year lease, so the project will continue through like 2045. Let's see here, next slide. Okay, so what's innovative about this project? So there's a number of things that are listed here. I'll go through them quickly. The first is that this is the first front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrid in PG&E's territory. And that's actually one of the first in California and throughout the nation. There are very few of these types of microgrids, front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrid. And so really the work we're doing here is really paving the way for more of these types of microgrids on utility systems. The second point is that PG&E, this microgrid will have, PG&E will have visibility into this microgrid and control capabilities from their distribution control center. So PG&E has distribution control centers that from which they're able to control operation of the distribution system and through their substations and make sure that they maintain the reliability and the power quality on the system that's required. As we put more and more distributed generators on the distribution system, it's important for utilities to start having visibility into those generators and some control capabilities to maintain stable power quality and reliability. So this will be the first system that PG&E is able to do that. And again, this is something we think will be really setting a trend for the future that will become much more common as we move forward. The third item there is that this is a DC coupled PV and battery system. I mentioned that. And the benefit there is that there are short-term fluctuations from output from PV systems when clouds come over and things like that. Basically, that output can be smoothed by DC coupling it to the battery system. And that's really important when you're in island mode and you're trying to maintain stability on your microgrid. To be able to smooth out those fluctuations is a big benefit. As I mentioned, the larger PV array and battery storage will be offered up on the CAISO wholesale market, and DER, Distributed Energy Resource Participation in CAISO's wholesale market, is a very new development. There's not much of that kind of activity yet, so we're working with CAISO to ramp that up for this project. We'll be learning a lot, and actually the folks from CAISO will be learning a lot in the process, and those lessons learned will help move this forward for future projects like this. So for all of this, we're developing with PG&E, with CAISO, and with other partners with RCEA, policies, procedures, standards, and even microgrid tariff. One of our responsibilities is to develop a experimental microgrid tariff that covers our project. We're working with PG&E and RCEA on that. And this will really be paving the way for replication of projects like this on the grid going forward. I'm sure probably most of you are familiar with the SB 1339 legislation that passed recently that basically requires that the CPUC, the CEC, and CAISO develop a microgrid tariff. And so the work that we're doing is for a real project is really going to help inform that SB 1339 work. And then finally, this is a partnership between an IOU and a CCA. That's not something that's very common, at least not here in California. But we think, that this is a great opportunity for those two entities to partner together and to really add value to the IOU and also to the CCA community. And so we're looking forward to demonstrating that and hopefully showing the way for others to do similar types of work. A little trouble. There we go. Okay, so the value of this project to the ratepayers, the solicitation from the CEC that we responded to, the #1 objective was to demonstrate a replicable microgrid and a replicable business model so that the CEC doesn't have to keep funding these things, that there's a business model and there's a way to replicate these because we do see value in seeing more of these on the grid. For RCEA, they have these strong goals for local renewable resource development, especially solar electric, and also an interest in adding storage. There was a requirement, as Richard said, that's been dialed back, but there's still an interest and a need for storage on the grid. And if you locate the storage and that distributed resource together, you can leverage the benefits of those two. If you now also locate that near critical facilities in your community, it's a small lift then to add microgrid controls and the ability to island and then gain resilience for those critical facilities. So we really see this as an opportunity going forward for many other communities, many other CCAs. And then the rest of this work that we're doing, paving the way for more front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrids, and then providing opportunities for stakeholder involvement and outreach, like the webinar we're doing today. And let's see here, oh, there we go. So in terms of opportunities for stakeholder involvement, if you're interested to learn more about our project, to basically keep up to date on what's happening, you can send an email to me, Jim Zoellick, at jimz@humboldt.edu. And what I ask is that if you do that, you indicate to me whether you're interested in the experimental tariff development, the business model evaluation and replication work that we're doing, or just general project status and success. And you can indicate one or more of those. We'll put you on a distribution list and we'll keep you abreast of what's happening with the project going forward. I think that's all I've had, so I'll pass it now on to Nikki from PG&E to give PG&E's perspective.
Thanks, Jim. Do I have control now?
Not quite yet, just give me a moment. Okay, you should now.
All right, thanks, Woody. So my name is Nikki Avila. I'm a Senior Innovation Engineer at PG&E. I would like to thank everyone for being here today and thank the Center for Climate Protection for hosting us. Today I'll be focusing my presentation on the role of PG&E in designing and deploying this microgrid. Richard and Jim have given you an overview of the motivation of the project and the exact design details of the project. I'll really be focusing on how PG&E is supporting that and ensuring that this microgrid is safe and reliable to operate in 2021. So I am part of the team at PG&E known as the Grid Integration and Innovation Organization. And our mission is to design, test, and integrate innovative solutions to accelerate PG&E's transition to the sustainable grid of the future. And as you can tell from the previous presentations, this project really fits squarely in that mission. Our particular project objectives is to enable and operate a multi-customer microgrid in grid-connected and islanded modes to satisfy the community demand for enhanced resilience. So we're ensuring that this project is successful, but definitely we also have an eye to the future in thinking about replicability. And our main value proposition in participating is to use this as an opportunity to demonstrate viable and replicable models for how to plan, deploy, and operate multi-customer microgrids in California. These project objectives are supported through the EPIC program. The EPIC program, that is the Electric Program Investment Charge, is a grant provided by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, that really provides funding for innovative technological demonstrations that advance California's energy policy goals. So PG&E is participating through this grant and really supporting being step-by-step together in the design process with RCEA and the Schatz Energy Research Center. As you know, PG&E is a leader in deploying diverse types of microgrids. I'll describe them in this slide. The first is the single customer microgrid, and Richard and Jim touched on this briefly. A single customer microgrid is typically on the customer side, it is on the customer side of the meter, and is typically deployed at military bases, campuses, and hospitals. And the main drivers of these type of microgrids is customer reliability and resilience, trying to reduce the impact of power outage at the facility. The key example of that is the Blue Lake Rancheria microgrid, which was designed together with the Schatz Energy Research Center and PG&E, and as Richard mentioned, has won multiple innovation awards. It's been operational now for 2 years. The second is a remote microgrid, and this is typically a microgrid system that is not connected to the centralized grid. And it's typically a utility-sponsored project, and sometimes you could have hybrid ownership where you have utility-owned distribution assets and customer-owned distributed generation. The key driver for this is a transmission and distribution system alternative in remote locations, either where the grid does not exist or where a decentralized system makes more economic and reliability benefits. An example of this is Angel Island, which is currently in its planning phase. And the third category is a multi-customer on-grid microgrid, for which we're all here today, the Arcata Airport Microgrid. And typically, this is a microgrid that is sought by cities to enable critical facilities to have energy in the event of a broader grid outage and to enhance local resilience. We see this being driven with the objective of having energy during larger natural disasters. And so we can see here co-locating that with critical facilities. For this example, at the airport near the U.S. Coast Guard station is really the objective of the microgrid. One thing that is unique to a multi-customer grid-connected microgrid is that it really uncovers a lot of technical and commercial arrangement questions that are first of its kind. Like Jim mentioned, this will be the first multi-customer microgrid in PG&E's service territory, and one of the first really in the country. And so it really uncovers a lot of challenges to the status quo operations of the grid. And this is really where PG&E delivers a lot of value to this project. So we really see PG&E's role as delivering the last mile of innovation for this project. And I'll kind of go into a few of the challenges that we see. First, we think about the technical design. There are standardized processes for how distributed resources can interconnect to the main grid and go through service planning. but there are no processes for a multi-customer microgrid, and really thinking about the processes for understanding the islanding capability. And in respect to that as well, we need to think about how the distribution system is changing due to the addition of these new islanding capabilities that kind of change the way the system will work in both blue sky, grid-connected conditions, and islanded conditions. So these two main work streams are a key part of our team's responsibility here at PG&E. As Jim mentioned, we also have the operations integration. So our goal is to ensure that we have a clear understanding of the controls architecture for islanding operations. So PG&E will own the master microgrid controller for this system, and that controls architecture is really critical to ensuring that the microgrid can transition from blue sky operations to islanded operations in a safe and reliable manner. In order to do this, we are establishing for the first time telemetry at the Distribution Control Center. And this will really give PG&E operators the ability to see the system at all times and to operate it in islanded conditions. A key challenge that is also part of a multi-customer microgrid is thinking about the communications and cybersecurity requirements. And this is really the key example, because in working together in the past few months with the Schatz Energy Research Center and RCEA, we've already seen this question come up in thinking about how energy is not really the only component of resilience that we need to deliver. We also have to ensure that the microgrid is connected to a resilient communications infrastructure. So if we're thinking of a natural disaster, what kind of systems will not go down in the event of a tsunami or an earthquake? So we're thinking about what kind of communications do we need, and if the goal is really resilience, we need to be thinking about seamless transitions instead of a break before make transition between islanded and blue sky conditions. All of these technical decisions and technical criteria are part of PG&E and Schatz and RCEA working together closely all through the project. One way that PG&E is really preparing to ensure that this microgrid will be safe and reliable to operate is that we're establishing a test bed at our advanced testing facility in San Ramon. So we're thinking about testing and validating the microgrid controller capabilities for this project and ensuring that we have that capability for future microgrids to come. As kind of mentioned as well by Richard and Jim, our key goal for this project is replicability. So we're thinking of what equipment will we be putting on this microgrid that could go into our standardized process for interconnecting to our system. As well as all of these technical considerations, we also need to be thinking about the allocation of cost and benefits among the different parties and the different customers on the microgrid, and how that will inform an experimental microgrid tariff, which is a key work stream here at PG&E that we're leading, and also then thinking about how that informs future business models for future microgrids. So to conclude, as you can see, our goal here is to fill in the gap of how to integrate multi-customer microgrids to the centralized system. And as Jim mentioned, this is the mandate of the Senate Bill 1339. So PG&E is always responsible for delivering safe and reliable power to all microgrid customers in both islanded and grid-connected modes. So these work streams are very important to us to ensuring that we have a way of understanding what the impacts of the microgrid will be to our system. And this project really puts us a step ahead to the requirements of the Senate Bill 1339 that is currently going into the commission proceedings this year. I think the relationships that we've built with RCEA and Schatz for many years now, as we see, really highlights the opportunities for innovative collaborations to deploy first-of-its-kind microgrid systems in California. We're really looking forward to seeing how this project informs how the future grid will look like. So with that, I will conclude. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at nikky.avila@pgne.com. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think we are now ready for our Q&A. So, Nikki, Nina, if you can get on voice and let us know, do we have, I would imagine we've got some questions from folks. I think we have about 8 minutes to take some questions, and then I have some concluding slides and upcoming events and things. So Nikki, I'm sorry, Nina, questions?
Yeah, so there are a few here. This first one is for Nikki, actually. Given that resilience is a main goal, is there concern that the distribution lines might be at risk during natural disasters like fire or earthquakes? Will the distribution lines be underground or hardened in any way?
That's a great question. For this particular microgrid, the distribution line will not be hardened, will not be underground or undergrounded. But that's definitely a consideration for thinking about resilience in other contexts. And I think we've kind of seen allusions to that question in thinking about the communications protocol, in thinking about visibility at the distribution control center when the rest of a region is kind of going through a natural disaster. But for this particular microgrid, the distribution system will not be undergrounded, but it's definitely a possibility for other use cases of microgrids in the future.
Okay, this next question is for Jim. Back to your diagram slide. The diagram does not show that the solar plus storage will serve at the airport behind the meter normal operations. Is this a V and EM arrangement, or is the diagram simplified?
I'm not quite sure what that acronym was, but so the batteries, the DC coupled PV array with battery storage will, they're all connected to the grid. But that is going to be participating in the CAISO wholesale market, so it will not be serving any behind the meter resources. Basically, the power will be sold on the CAISO wholesale market, but it will serve RCEA's CCE or community choice aggregation customers throughout the region. Only the 250 kW AC or 330 kW DC net metered system will be a behind the meter asset through, as I said, through aggregate net metering to the airport property. But all of those resources will provide power on the microgrid when it's in island mode. And so that's actually part of the experimental tariff work that we're doing with PG&E and RCEA, is figuring out how to deal with this wholesale generator that's now providing power to these retail customers during an island operation.
And
this is Richard.
acronym, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify the acronym was virtual net energy metering.
Gotcha, okay.
Other questions, Nina?
Yes, this question is for Richard. Can you expand on the context of the CCA storage mandate not being in effect anymore?
Yes, this is something that we just learned about recently. Back in December, there was an advice letter filed to the CPUC by the investor-owned utilities, and in the response to that, the CPU staff noted that the requirement for CCAs and also ESPs, which are direct access providers, to provide 1% of their peak load in equivalent in storage capacity is no longer in effect, and that's because there was a provision for that to be for that requirement to go away under certain circumstances that are elaborated on in that letter from the CPUC staff. So I can provide a link to that if anybody's trying to track down that documentation. I do have it.
Yeah,
And I think,
This is Woody. I'll just chime in on that. We will provide information about that in the webinar, in the associated materials, in the link on the cleanpowerexchange.org website. And I'm sorry, Jim, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to add, I think if I understood looking at that letter, that part of the issue was that that the non-bypassable charges that do come through to CCA customers, that those were now covering the cost of the utilities providing that storage, so that sort of took away the requirement that the CCAs had to provide their own storage, that they were already, those customers were already paying for it through the non-bypassable charges. That's how I understood it anyway.
And I'll just add one more thing, which is that, mandates or not, the community choice agencies, quite a number of them are engaging, as is Redwood Coast, on projects and programs that advance storage. So, it's not something that the community choice agencies need to be told to do. They're doing it. Other questions, Nina?
Yes, so I'm not sure exactly who this is aimed for, but can you talk a little bit about CAISO market participation? Is the solar self-scheduled, or is it dispatched using the battery? Is there participation in service markets as well? So,
Richard, I can say a little bit, maybe then you want to chime in, or?
Sure.
So we are working with RCEA's CAISO scheduler, the Energy Authority, or TEA. We are looking at the various market opportunities. So that includes the hour ahead and 15-minute markets for energy, but also the ancillary service markets. I missed. There was another part of that question, but so basically, we're going to look at the various opportunities. We're going to try to look at what is most the best economics for RCEA as an entity, and we're working with TEA on that, and that will determine how we dispatch things. Because the PV array is DC coupled to the battery, it will be essentially a dispatchable resource that we can basically store the solar energy during the day when power prices are cheap, and dispatch that when prices are more expensive. And TEA will have the responsibility of determining what the dispatch profile is for the battery PV system, coupled system. Basically, they'll do that a day ahead, and then offer that up into the CAISO market.
Yeah, I think that's enough detail for what we're getting into here.
All right, and I should probably have that be the final question. And thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sure there are questions that we did not get to, so we will follow up on those with you. And so thanks for everyone participating, and thank you to the presenters. And I just would like to go into a few final notes here about things that are coming up. First of all, this is the location, the location in our resources section at Clean Power Exchanges, where we have a repository of the recordings and information on our webinar. So that's where you will be able to find the materials. And again, if there were problems downloading the handouts, those handouts will be included. Our next webinar is going to be on May 22nd at 11 a.m. It'll feature Lorenzo Christov, longtime expert in the energy arena, formerly of CAISO, many years at CAISO, and currently independent consultant, talking about a restructured electricity system of the future. Also, for folks that are not aware, we host an annual Business of Local Energy Symposium. That is coming up on June 20th and 21st in Irvine, California this year. Just go to cleanpowerexchange.org and you'll see the Business of Local Energy Symposium link on that page. I forgot to put the URL there. but that's coming up on June 20th and 21st in Irvine. And I think, no, there should be one more slide here. Looks like it's, oh, there it is. It's the thank you slide. So thank you once again to all three of our presenters and Julie for presenting the DER Hub. We will be following up with each of you about the launch of the DER Hub. If anyone has any questions at all regarding anything on the webinar today, feel free to reach out and follow up with me. And it is high noon, so I'm sure everybody's ready for lunch, and we'll let you go do that. But just once again, thank you to all our presenters, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Woody.
Thank you, Woody.
Take care.